What is up, guys, and welcome to Delta Theory, a video that is going to be exploring a very interesting concept for the Pokemon franchise, I guess, that was revealed, put out there, sort of hinted at in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire in the Delta episode. So be warned, there will be some spoilers for that. They're not huge spoilers, but some that might, you might want to hold off watching this video until you've beaten the Delta episode. Anyway, this video is going to be akin to Game Theory, as you guys might know, a very popular YouTube channel. So basically, you can imagine it as TheOneIntegral plus Game Theory, except it's just me, because I'm not cool enough to work with the theorists. But this video is going to be a very similar format. Anyway, I guess we shall crack on with Delta Theory. So, first we've got to establish the order in which the Pokemon games occur before we can go further on and explore more stuff about this. For ease of explanation, I'm only going to be covering the main series games in this sort of timeline, rather than the spin-offs, so games like Pokemon Colosseum, Ranger, stuff like that aren't going to be included just because, we don't really need to know too much about those. We're looking mainly at the main series here. But up until sometime last year, the only sort of links we had for the timeline, sort of in what order it happened, were a sort of fleetingly references and cross sort of speculation across the games. For example, we had the Red Gyarados report in Diamond and Pearl, which is obviously a reference to Johto, so you guys get what I mean there. And then there was also the one in Black and White where there was a Team Rocket Grunt who had stolen the machine part, or the power plant part, from Gold, Silver, etc. So we then knew how far sort of ahead he was and where these sort of timelines are. But at one point last year, a very helpful man called Toshinobu Matsumiya, one of the leading directors working on the majority of main series Pokemon games. If you go and look what he's worked on, there's a Lotus Ruby and Sapphire, there's X and Y I think he worked to. Basically, his main focus is game dialogue and scenario, so if anyone knows the timeline of Pokemon, it's going to be him, because he knows, he makes a story up basically, he's a key worker on that, so if anyone knows the timeline, he's going to know it best. But he took to Twitter and tweeted this tweet out. Obviously it's not a huge amount of use to you at the moment, but this translates to the following. Generation 1 happens at the same time as Generation 3, so Red, Blue, Yellow, and then the remakes Fire Red, Leaf Green happen at the same time as Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, and the remakes Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Then, a few years later I think it is, 3 years later to be exact, we have Generation 2 happening, since we know 3 years after the Generation 1 stuff happens, Johto and Kanto are revisited, and then we also have Generation 4 happening at pretty much the same time, hence the Gyarados report in Diamond and Pearl, so that's that there. Then, an undefined amount of years later, we're not told how many years, but since we have the rocket with the power plant part, we can assume, since he's moved to Unova, he's got a wife, he's had some kids, we can assume it's around about 10 years, if a bit less. So that's sort of, we don't know how long it's been, but it's certainly afterwards we have Black and White occurring. Then 2 years after that we have Black 2 and White 2 occurring, because again it's sort of sequel based, so we know there. We were told also on this tweet, we knew pretty much this storyline, but we didn't know where X and Y came in. But we were told on this tweet obviously that X and Y happen at the same time as Black 2 and White 2, so this helped us sort of pin it in there so we know exactly what's happening in where. So this is what we can understand as the timeline prior to Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire being released. I mean, I have listed the games under Generation 3 right at the start, but this is due to change, guys, so yeah. However, some of the dialogue and topics discussed in the Delta episode may turn this timeline completely on its head, and more than just the timeline, the whole Pokemon universe. To talk about this further, you actually need to understand a specific scientific or physiological theory known as the Multiverse Theory. So I'm going to try and explain this as simply as I can, but I apologise if I don't quite get it down to a T. This theory, the Multiverse Theory, is a theory that there are an infinite or possibly a finite amount of universes that exist, including the one we currently inhabit. So, get your head around that. We're here, we can access, well, if assuming we had the best technology out there, we could access all the reaches of time and space. However, we could not visit other universes unless we had something to cross between universes, for example. So you can imagine our universe is sort of encased in this bubble, I guess, and then there are other bubbles around this bubble that are other universes that are parallel, I guess. You could explain it like that. Each of the universes, as I just mentioned, is commonly referred to as a parallel universe or an alternate universe. Parallel is usually used in terms of talking about two specific events and such. Now, one of the ideas behind the multiverse theory is that each time a choice is made or an event occurs, a new universe is created from that. Not necessarily created, but sort of is produced. So, if I give you an example here, say, this morning I woke up and I decided I was going to make some toast. That's one universe there. However, maybe in a different universe, I didn't decide to make toast. Instead, I just had cornflakes or something. That's two completely different universes now. One of them I have toast, and one of them I have cornflakes. And who knows what that change could make? It could destroy the universe. It could destroy Earth. It's a very silly example, that one exactly. But we can look at a sort of a more obvious example. So say we have our universe. This is our universe. Then, back in, I don't know when he was born, 1960-ish, 1950, Junichi Masuda was born in our universe, so that becomes our universe. And obviously Junichi Masuda goes on to help produce the Pokemon franchise, so we get Pokemon and stuff like that. This is our universe down here on the left. But imagine a universe in which Junichi Masuda was never born. Possibly, his father died before he was able to be conceived, or something happened that made Junichi Masuda not be able to born, or at least grow up. This universe is at least not going to have Pokemon in the same sense we have it. It may have been produced later on, but it won't be the exact same because Junichi Masuda does not exist in this other universe. So that's an example there. It's a very sort of basic example, but we've got Pokemon. This universe does not have Pokemon. So hopefully you guys understand that there. It can be applied to other things. For example, if World War II never happened, how would our universe be different now? Obviously we're looking at it in terms of a universe here, but really the only changes we're seeing are on Earth, because that's just as far as we can go. But you can imagine it's something else, like maybe the sun blows up in a different parallel universe, which means our planet doesn't exist at all in this other universe now. So hopefully you guys are getting your head around that. And this does give way forward to the fact that we have our universe now, and in our universe we have Pokemon, but there may be a universe out there where Pokemon actually exist. Because if we assume there are an infinite amount of universes, which means there are an infinite amount of different, stories and, just sort of situations. So it's plausible, if we believe in the multiverse theory, that somewhere out there could be a universe and a planet on which Pokemon actually exist. It's a bit hard to get your head around, but that's sort of the idea there. As I've just sort of gone through, it can be applied to our real world and universe we inhabit. I won't get much further into it because it is a bit confusing, but it can be applied to other universes, particularly in video games. Now, as I mentioned at the start, Game Theorists is sort of a related video to that, but one popular example of this is the Zelda Multiverse Theory. And this theory, contains 3 main timelines. If you guys are interested in Zelda, you may have heard of it before, but basically, the 3 main timelines you can see here. It starts off as one timeline, but it branches off depending on the outcomes of certain games. For example, in Ocarina of Time, if the hero is defeated, we go off to the left-hand side, and some more games span out of that because Ganon takes over Hyrule, and then some more games come from that. But then we have 2 more timelines that branch off from the hero winning, which is the child era and the adult era. This is a bit, I can't really get my head around this myself, but there's a child era, carries and follows. If Link stays as a child after Ocarina of Time, you get these games. If he stays as an adult, you get these games. So it kind of goes on like that, guys. This is an official timeline given by Nintendo, but if you want to learn some more about the Zelda sort of timeline and why it might be wrong, you can go and check out this video from Game Theory themselves and the Game Theorists themselves, which have covered this sort of topic in more detail and maybe explain it better than I have as well. So go and check that out if you're interested in learning some more about the Zelda timeline. But for the moment, let's move back to Pokemon. So you can interpret the multiverse theory to explain how a game in an allotted timeline or a universe with certain alterations. For example, we're going to pick one game from each generation to occur and set it to be one timeline. So here we have at the bottom left, we have all the games. So I'm going to pick one from each of these. So for example, we have Pokemon Red, Pokemon Ruby, Pokemon Gold, Pokemon Diamond, Pokemon Black. We have to have Black 2 because Black 2 is paired with Black, if you guys get that what I mean there. And then we have Pokemon X. So I've just chosen one game from each block, okay? So that is one timeline, okay? We can set this as a universe. We can say, this is Universe 1, right there. That's Universe 1 in which those games occur, because as you guys will be able to figure out, we can't have Pokemon Red and Pokemon Yellow occurring concurrently because there's only one Red, you know? And obviously we can't have Pokemon Diamond and Pokemon Pearl occurring concurrently because we can't have Team Galactic try and get Dialga and then they also try and get Palkia. That doesn't work. That doesn't work at all. So you can only have one of each game from each generation. You could argue in some cases you could have both. For example, if we had maybe Ruby and Emerald, but then again that's a bit different again because, you know, Ruby you move into the town, and then maybe an Emerald, Ruby's again. Yeah, we're just going to keep it simple. We're not going to go too much further into that. We're picking one from each generation to saying, and this is Universe 1. That's one possible timeline of the Pokemon timeline. So for example, if we then just change one game, if we change Pokemon Red to Pokemon Blue here, we have another timeline here. The only difference being the Pokemon Red and Blue. Now, the differences between Red and Blue are very, very minute. It's the only the game exclusive Pokemon that are actually different because they have exactly the same sort of storylines. That's a bit of a silly, bit of a minor change. But if we set that out to be Universe 2, but then say in Universe 3 we change Universe 2 to, instead of having Pokemon Diamond there, we have Pokemon Platinum there. So, you know, in this universe, instead of Team Galactic just trying to make a new universe using Dialga, they open up the distortion world and, you know, meet up with Giratina and whatnot. So that's a bigger difference to the timeline. Obviously, we don't know what effects they could have in the future. Maybe opening the distortion world in Pokemon Platinum causes some other effects in the future. That could happen. But, you know, basically, that's the sort of theory there. So those are our examples, I guess. So, as I said, most of them are fairly minor, but you can create what I'm creating, what I'm considering the major timeline or universe in the Pokemon series. So this is based on the games that incorporate the most story into them, or are generally the sequels. For example, Ruby and Sapphire, they're sort of on their own, whereas Emerald incorporates both Groudon, Kyogre, Team Aqua, Team Magma, and Rayquaza all in one. So I would say that's a more complete story than either just Ruby and Sapphire on their own. So here is my major storyline for the Pokemon series. We have Pokemon Yellow. The reason I've chosen Pokemon Yellow here is because obviously Ash gets Pikachu, or not Ash rather, Red gets Pikachu as his starter, and he also is able to pick up the free starter Pokemon as we continue. Then when we rebattle him in Generation 2, Red on top of Mount Silver has a Pikachu, and he has the free Kanto starters. So that makes the most sense to me, whereas in Red and Blue, or Fire and Leaf Green, he only has, or you can only get one of the starters, and you can catch Pikachu somewhere else. If you guys understand me there, hopefully you do. You know, the fact that you can actually get all 4 of them in Yellow, whereas you again get one starter and Pikachu in the other games. Then I've paired it with Pokemon Emerald. As I've explained already, Emerald seems to have the most storyline in it, so that makes more sense to me. Then I've chosen Crystal here, just again because Crystal is the sequel. It incorporates the most story into it, and obviously focuses a bit more on Suicune, so I guess it just incorporates more legendaries, more characters in general into that game. And I've paired that at the same time happening as Platinum, because Platinum incorporates both Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, and generally has just more storyline overall. One difference that is, I guess, maybe a bit interesting to note between Diamond and Pearl and Platinum is Platinum is colder, because you've got the snow dotted around the region, whereas in Diamond and Pearl you don't have that. So maybe one of the previous timelines affected this? We don't know. But that's just one difference to note out there. Then we actually have to split the timeline, so we can't have a single major timeline, we have to have 2 major timelines, because we can't have both black and white occurring at the same time, and I can't really choose either saying, yeah, black's the more important one, or black's the more sort of the one with the most story in it, because they're exactly the same games, except they just have switched legendaries. There's no Pokemon Grey, for example, that includes both Reshiram, Zekrom, and Kyurem. So we have to have 2 timelines going off here. One follows black, and then black 2, and then the other follows white, and then white 2. But these are the 2 major timelines for the Pokemon universe. Notice that I have completely omitted X and Y from these major timelines, and the reason why is what we're going to cover now. So, if you've played the Delta episodes, this is where the spoilers come in here, in Omega Green Alpha Sapphire, you'll know that towards the beginning of this, Steven and the leader, the scientist in the Moss Deep Space Center have some plans to warp away the approaching meteoroid far away. As you can see with this sort of short text here, you can tell their plan involves using infinity energy, which was created by the ultimate weapon back 3,000 years ago during the war, and infinity energy is also the same energy including the Mega Evolution. So the ultimate weapon is what eventually caused Mega Evolution to occur in the world, and obviously allows them to use this rocket to create a warp hole and then warp the meteoroid away, transport it somewhere far away from here. Then, a bit later on in the Delta episode, Zinnia comes along and then warns you guys. She says, you know, okay, you can snap your fingers, the asteroid's going to vanish, and everyone's going to live happily ever after. Yeah, all good. But, where does the asteroid go? And she says it could be the worst tragedy imaginable for some other world and everything on it. From generation to generation, we pass on the law about the distortions in the world. The law about the distortions of the world born by the mega evolution mechanism. So it's basically saying the mega evolution sort of stuff happening, the ultimate weapon being used, has caused some sort of distortion or effect on the world in general because of this infinity energy that now exists, just in this storyline. And then she goes on to say about the existence of another world, which we have long observed to be just like this one and yet not the same. That's right, a Hone region that's almost exactly like this one we live in, a world where maybe the evolution of Pokemon took a slightly different path, where mega evolution is unknown, a world where that war 3,000 years ago never happened, a world where the ultimate weapon was never even built. What world could this be, guys? Now you'll know, in the first 5 generations of Pokemon, there was no mention of Mega Evolution at all. No mention of Mega Evolution at all. And if we're to assume that Oras takes place at the same time as Ruby and Sapphire would, if Mega Evolution is common knowledge now in this universe, why was it not mentioned in Diamond and Pearl Platinum, or Heart Gold and Soul Silver, or in Black and White, which are 10 years, maybe even more, after the Hone games? Why were these Mega Evolutions not mentioned? I know there's a big place and Unova might be far away from Hone and whatnot, but it doesn't take 10 years to transport that information, especially when you have boats, okay? So why was this never mentioned, guys? And there was no mention of the war either in any of the first 5 generations. Obviously that's because they hadn't thought of the idea yet of Mega Evolution and of the war, hence why it wasn't in the game. But thinking about it in terms of, imagine these were real, why was it unheard of? Where Mega Evolution is unknown. Basically, what Zinnia is saying here is that this Pokemon and Mega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire take place in a different universe, a parallel universe, to the original games, basically. So, I get you guys probably are gonna, take a bit to get into this. It does take a bit to get our head around, to be honest, but she's talking about the fact that the Kalos War doesn't happen. Okay, we go back to 3,000 years ago. Okay, there's obviously something that sparks the Kalos War. In one universe, it starts, it goes on, AZ then uses the ultimate weapon, infinity energy is brought into the world, mega evolutions happen, and eventually, stuff happens, and that's where we get X and Y from, and obviously Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. But what if the war didn't happen? There's no war, there's no ultimate weapon, there's no infinity energy, there's no mega evolution. Very similar to the original 5 generations. So basically what we are assuming from this, or bringing from this, is that there are 2 main universes in the Pokemon series. The first one is the normal universe, the first 5 generations of Pokemon, where you have obviously Ruby, Red, Blue, Yellow, Fire, Leaf Green Generation 1, and then Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald Generation 3 happening at the same time. Then you have Generation 2 and Generation 4 happening at the same time, and then we go on to Generation 5. There was no mention of Mega Evolution in any of these games, so hence why it's in the normal universe. But then on an alternate timeline, in a different parallel universe, where the war did happen, we have a Mega Ruby Alpha Sapphire and X and Y in the Mega universe, where Mega Evolutions exist. Basically, this whole thing is just a cop-out, so Game Freak can explain why we didn't hear anything about the Mega Evolutions in the first 5 games, and now suddenly bring it in, because they're in different universes. It's not like they don't want to hold their hands up and say, yeah, we had a new idea, deal with it. They want to explain it in some way, and this is a really cool way of explaining it. So you have these 2 universes, assuming a Mega Ruby Alpha Sapphire happened at the same time in terms of the timeline, so it happened where Ruby, Sapphire and Emerald happened, so before X and Y. This is a bit weird to think of, because in X and Y we were just discovering Mega Evolutions, whereas in the Mega Ruby Alpha Sapphire there's sort of common knowledge, so possibly these games could end up happening at the same time. But really, we really don't know. We're not sure quite yet. There's no indication. There's no references of X and Y with Hone and Oras, to be honest. Nothing we can see in particular. There is a few, but no like direct ones saying, yeah, this happened then, sort of thing. So we can't tell where this happens. I'm assuming, though, for the purpose of this video, that Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire happened before X and Y. Assuming X and Y are still happening at the same time as Black 2 and White 2, it's a good 10 years, which seems a bit weird. So obviously it may be changed around. But that's the two universes there, guys. Those are your two universes for Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, or for the Pokemon game in general. So, hopefully you guys understand that. If you don't, drop a comment down below and I'll try and explain it a bit better in sort of text-wise. But now we're going to take the Mega Universe, expand it, and focus on that. Because at the moment the Mega Universe only has these two sets of games, Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire and X and Y. So, this is it, you know. Now, this doesn't mean, the fact they're in a different universe does not mean Kanto, Johto, and Sinnoh and Unova don't exist. They will most likely still exist, but there's just no games for them yet. But we could have games in the future. First, though, we need to think about the possibility of another game for Generation 6. We can assume that Mega Evolution will carry on for Generation 6 at least. At least, okay? We can assume that at least. So maybe there's going to be another Generation 6 game fitting into this timeline. So we're getting at least one more game in this Mega Universe. Whether the Mega Evolution is going to continue after Generation 6 into Generation 7, we don't know. We're not sure. It's a possibility, but they might end up removing it. But then again, it is such an integral feature. Integral, get it? Boom. Feature in the games now. They might even choose to keep it on and have to sort of compensate for that in their future makes. But one thing we need to think about as well, as I sort of mentioned just now, is what if X and Y is before Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire? Because X and Y were just discovering Mega Evolution, and Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, everyone, or not everyone, but a good deal of people know about it. So possibly X and Y happened before Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, or at the same time. This would make more sense to me because the fact that just, you know, when we're learning about Mega Evolution, since Sycamore sort of like just sort of investigating it in X and Y, so that would make more sense to me. But whether they'll actually sort of bring it around to that, we don't know. For the purposes of the rest of this video, though, I'm going to keep it as Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire being before in the timeline. So we need to think about a last game for Generation 6. So what would make sense? Well, a sequel to X and Y. This could be Pokemon Z, and it could come after X and Y. So maybe 2 or 3 years after the events of X and Y, you have Pokemon Z happening. This is a possibility, obviously. It most likely will follow Zygarde, and maybe it will just build up more on Mega Evolution and stuff like that. Or maybe we'll get... This is a big maybe, guys. It's a big maybe, but maybe we'll get a Pokemon Emerald version, okay? So maybe this will, first off, maybe it will add on just as a sort of another game to Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, so Delta Emerald will just slot in there as an alternative. So rather having Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire and then, for example, 3 years later have Delta Emerald, just have it there, like the original Emerald was. The other possibility, obviously, is to have it as a sequel to Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, but this could also tie in as a prequel to X and Y, bridging the gap between the two games, or alternatively, the other way around, a sequel to X and Y as a prequel to Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, bridging the gap there. So this could be a mix of, as I've sort of speculated in the past, both regions. So you start off in Hone, have your first, sort of just do everything there, beat the Pokemon League, and then you go to Kalos and have your second adventure in that region there. That's a possibility there, or maybe it's just going to sort of focus on one region, for example Kalos. I'm guessing Kalos because we'll revisit there, but maybe it will reference other stuff for Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, maybe Rayquaza, stuff like that. That would be really interesting for me at least. But then moving further on from Generation 6, where might future games also get put in this timeline? Because we may get future remakes in the future, maybe Diamond and Pearl will get remade. And where will those go in the timeline? Well, they might go slap bang in the middle as well. Or they might happen concurrently, or whatever. Obviously, because these are remakes now, and they may be still happening in the Mega Universe, they could make it up that no one knows about Megas, so they could put it right at the start, happening at the same time as X and Y, or Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, or they could put it right at the end when everyone knows about Megas, and they're trying to, use some sort of method to harness the power of Mega Evolutions. Possibly, I don't know, guys. But Diamond and Pearl, or the remakes of Diamond and Pearl, tentatively named here Temporal Diamond and Celestial Pearl, could possibly be there. Now the other one is remakes of the Unova games, Pokemon Pitch Black and Pokemon Radiant White. Now, we know, definitely, if there are remakes of the Unova games, they will be coming after Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire. Whether or not that's the first game in the timeline, or the after X and Y, the Unova remakes will be coming afterwards. The reason for this, in the Mega Man Sapphire, there is a ship in the shipyard being built, and it's the Royal Unova. Now, obviously, they could make black and white remakes without the Royal Unova in it, which would fix that problem entirely if they wanted to change their minds. But if the Royal Unova does indeed feature in pitch black and radiant white, much like you'd assume it would, then that will most likely be coming after, or definitely be coming after, a Mega Man Sapphire, whether or not it's at the start or the end of the timeline so far. But those are sort of all the different ideas I discovered or thought about. I didn't think about any more Kanto remakes. Obviously, if you're thinking about they have to build up the Mega Universe again, so there's a bigger possibility there for Kanto remakes to happen again, Johto remakes to happen again. Further down the line we're talking about, guys, but it's still a possibility for it to happen to implement Mega Evolutions and the Mega Universe in that storyline. As I've said though, after Generation 6 is over, they could well just decide to switch back over and just go to the normal universe again when Mega Evolution is not possible, or at least introduce it later on, and then possibly have a Mega Man Sapphire happen later in the timeline there. Something along those lines. It's very complicated, guys. There's loads of different options. Obviously, for the Mega Universe, you could have a Mega Ruby and X happening on one timeline, and then Alpha Sapphire and Y happening on another, and switching them around. There are loads of different combinations of the timelines in each universe, but there's two main universes, your normal universe and your Mega Universe. But that's just a theory. A game theory. I'm sorry, I had to say it. I'm doing a video similar to it. I had to say it. But thank you for watching the Delta Theory, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, let me know down below what you think of Delta Theory. Do you think this is an established thing now? We have two universes for the Pokemon franchise, and all future games can be in the Mega Universe, and what just let me know, guys. Let me know. Spew your thoughts for the Delta Theory down below in the comment section. I'm really interested to see what you guys think, because I'm really interested by the subject, so hopefully you guys are too. But for now, I think this is going to be it for me today. I thank you for watching. Goodbye, my friends.